They don't tell you in training that the hardest person you'll ever have to save might be someone who just tried to kill you. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was a combat medic with the Army's 10th Mountain Division. For 18 months, I served in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, one of the most hostile regions in the entire theater of operations. I patched up blast wounds, treated gunshot injuries, and held the hands of dying soldiers while calling in medevac helicopters. I was good at my job, maybe too good, but there was one mission, one decision, that would cost me everything I'd worked for, and teach me the most important lesson of my military career. A lesson about what it really means to take an oath, and what happens when your duty conflicts with every instinct screaming inside your head. It was August 2011. The heat was suffocating, the kind that makes your gear feel like it weighs twice as much and turns every breath into an effort. Our platoon was on a routine patrol through a village that intelligence had flagged as a potential Taliban staging area. Routine, that's the word that should terrify every soldier, because in combat, routine is when you let your guard down. Routine is when you die. We were moving through a narrow alley between mud brick compounds when the world exploded. The IED was buried in the wall to our right. Whoever placed it knew exactly what they were doing. The blast channeled directly into our formation, and suddenly I was on the ground, ears ringing, tasting copper and dust. Training took over. I did a quick self-assessment. Nothing broken, no bleeding. I could move. Around me, the scene was chaos. Sergeant Martinez was down, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Private Collins was screaming, clutching his arm. Specialist Rodriguez wasn't moving at all. Medic, someone was shouting. And then I realized it was me they were calling for. I was the medic. I went to Rodriguez first. He was the worst. Shrapnel had torn through his body armor and into his chest. I could hear the sucking sound of a collapsed lung. I had maybe 3 minutes to seal the wound or he'd die right there in that alley. My hands moved on autopilot. Seal the wound, start an IV, call for medevac, keep him alive. But while I was working on Rodriguez, the firefight erupted. Gunfire echoed off the compound walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Our guys were returning fire, shouting coordinates, trying to identify where the attack was coming from. Then I heard Lieutenant Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. Tango down, northeast corner, second floor, tango down, enemy combatant neutralized. I kept working on Rodriguez, got the chest seal in place, got the IV started. His breathing was stabilizing. He might make it. Chen, we got another wounded. Northeast compound, Morrison shouted. I grabbed my aid bag and ran, keeping low. 2 soldiers were already at the compound entrance, weapons trained inside. They'd cleared the first floor, second floor. One of them said, "But Chen, you should know." I didn't wait to hear the rest. A wounded soldier needed help. That was all that mattered. I took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the room where I could hear someone struggling to breathe. And then I froze. The wounded fighter wasn't one of ours. He was Taliban, maybe 19, maybe 20 years old. He'd been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the abdomen. He was conscious, his eyes wide with pain and fear. His AK-47 lay on the floor 3 feet away, and scattered around him were shell casings. This was the fighter who had detonated the IED. The one who had shot at my brothers and sisters. The one responsible for Rodriguez fighting for his life downstairs. Our eyes met, and I saw something I didn't expect. Not hatred, not defiance, terror. He was dying, and he knew it. "Chen, what are you doing?" It was Corporal Davis, standing in the doorway behind me, rifle raised. "That's the triggerman. Intel needs him for questioning. But he's not priority. We've got our own wounded." He was right. Every second I spent here was a second I wasn't spending on Martinez or Collins. We had limited medical supplies, limited time, limited resources. The calculus was simple. Save our guys first. But here's what they don't teach you in medic training. Not really. They teach you the Geneva Conventions. They teach you that once an enemy combatant is wounded and no longer a threat, they become a patient. They teach you that your oath is to preserve life, regardless of whose life it is. But they don't teach you what to do when every cell in your body is screaming to let the enemy bleed out, when the adrenaline and anger and grief are telling you that this person, this boy, doesn't deserve your help. Chen, Davis said again, we need you downstairs. My hands were shaking. The fighter was looking at me, and in his eyes I could see that he understood. He knew what I was thinking. He knew I could choose to let him die. The abdominal wound was bad. Without treatment, he had maybe 20 minutes. With treatment, he might survive long enough for the medevac. 20 minutes, that was all the life he had left, unless I did something. I thought about Rodriguez, about Martinez, about every soldier who'd been killed or maimed by Taliban IEDs in this valley. I thought about the oath I'd taken when I became a medic to conserve the fighting strength and to treat all patients without regard to race, color, religion, or political affiliation. And I thought about who I wanted to be, not just as a soldier, but as a human being. I dropped to my knees beside the fighter and opened my aid bag. What are you doing? Davis asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. My job, I said, and started working. The shoulder wound was through and through, not immediately life-threatening, but the abdominal wound was bad. I could see intestinal perforation. He needed surgery, and he needed it fast. The fighter was watching me work. He said something in Pashto that I didn't understand, but his tone was clear. He was asking why. Why was I helping him? I wish I could have answered him, because honestly, I wasn't entirely sure myself. I got both wounds packed and bandaged, started an IV to replace the blood volume he was losing, gave him morphine for the pain, basic trauma care, the same I'd give to any wounded soldier. Chen, you're wasting supplies, Davis said from the doorway. Supplies we might need for our guys. He wasn't wrong. We had a limited load out of medical equipment. Every bandage I used on the Taliban fighter was one less bandage I had for American soldiers. But something had shifted inside me when I looked into that fighter's eyes. Some line I'd drawn in my mind, between us and them, between worthy and unworthy, between human and enemy, had suddenly seemed arbitrary and fragile. I finished stabilizing him and stood up. He's stable for transport. He'll need surgery within the hour. Davis stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I went back downstairs and checked on the rest of our wounded. Martinez was in pain but stable. Collins had a nasty laceration, but would be fine. Rodriguez was holding on, breathing better with the chest seal in place. The medevac arrived. 15 minutes later, we loaded our wounded first. That was protocol. But then came the question, what about the Taliban fighter? Leave him, one of the soldiers said. Let him rot. I understood the sentiment. I really did. But I also knew that if we left him, we were no better than the enemy we were fighting. He comes with us, I said. He's a patient now. The pilot looked at me, then at Lieutenant Morrison. Morrison was the one who had to make the call. Load him up, Morrison finally said. Intel wants him alive anyway. So we loaded the Taliban fighter onto the helicopter, alongside our wounded. I rode with them, monitoring vitals, making sure everyone stayed stable during the flight to the field hospital. Rodriguez made it, so did Martinez and Collins, and so did the Taliban fighter. Though he'd need multiple surgeries and weeks of recovery, I thought that would be the end of it. Another mission, another day survived. But when we got back to base, I was called into the commander's office. Captain Williams was sitting behind his desk, and his expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be a commendation. Sergeant Chen, he said, I've received reports about your conduct during yesterday's engagement. Sir, you used medical supplies designated for U.S. personnel on an enemy combatant. Supplies that, according to Corporal Davis, we were running low on. The supplies were sufficient for all wounded parties, sir. All our soldiers received appropriate care. That's not the point. Williams leaned forward. The point is that you prioritized an enemy fighter over potential future needs for our own troops. Sir, with respect, that fighter was no longer enemy combatant. He was a wounded patient, and under the Geneva Conventions, I know what the Geneva Conventions say, Sergeant, but I also know that we're fighting an enemy that doesn't follow those conventions, an enemy that would never extend the same courtesy to our wounded. He wasn't wrong about that. We'd all heard the stories of what happened to American soldiers captured by the Taliban. Sir, I took an oath as a combat medic. That oath doesn't have an exception clause for when it's inconvenient or when the patient is someone we don't like. William sighed. He looked tired. Chen, I understand your position. I even respect it. But you need to understand something. Optics matter. Word is spreading through the unit that you treated a Taliban fighter who just tried to kill our guys, that you used our medical supplies on him. Some soldiers are questioning whether they can trust you to prioritize them in future engagements. That hit me like a physical blow. The trust of your unit is everything in combat. If soldiers didn't trust me to put them first, I couldn't do my job effectively. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying you need to be more aware of how your actions are perceived. You did your duty according to the letter of military law, but you may have damaged your effectiveness as a combat medic. I was dismissed, but the damage was done. Over the next few weeks, I could feel the change in how soldiers interacted with me. Some were supportive, saying I'd done the right thing, but others were distant, cold. There were whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The worst was when Private Collins, whose arm I'd treated after the IED attack, approached me in the mess hall. Hey Chen, he said, I just wanted to say thanks for patching me up out there. Just doing my job, Collins. He nodded, then hesitated. But I also wanted to ask, if it came down to it, if you only had enough supplies for one person, and it was me or another fighter like that guy, who would you choose? The question hung in the air between us, because that was the real issue, wasn't it? It wasn't about whether I'd followed protocol, it was about whether my loyalty was absolute. I choose you, I said, every time. Our guys come first, always, but that's not what happened out there. We had enough supplies. Everyone got treated. Collins nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wanted me to say that I'd have let the fighter die, that American lives mattered more than enemy lives. Full stop. And the truth was, I couldn't say that, not because I didn't value American lives more. I absolutely did, but because the moment you start making those choices, the moment you decide that some lives aren't worth saving, you've crossed a line that you can never uncross. 2 months later, I was back at base when I got called to the command center. There was an Afghan man there, asking to speak with me. He was a village elder from the area where we'd been hit by the IED. Through an interpreter, he told me an interesting story. The Taliban fighter I'd saved was named Rashid. He was from a village nearby, recruited by the Taliban when he was 17, after I'd saved his life, after he'd been treated at the field hospital, and then transferred to a detention facility. Something had changed in him. He'd cooperated with intelligence, providing information about Taliban operations in the region, not because of any enhanced interrogation techniques, but because, as he told the interrogators, an American soldier had saved his life when she could have let him die. That intelligence led to the disruption of a major Taliban supply line and potentially saved dozens of coalition lives. But more than that, Rashid's story had spread through the local villages, the tale of an American medic who treated a Taliban fighter with the same care she'd give her own soldiers, in a region where the narrative was that Americans were cruel occupiers who didn't value Afghan lives. My actions had created a different story. The village elder said that 3 young men from his village had been considering joining the Taliban. After hearing Rashid's story, they'd changed their minds. You showed us that not all Americans are the same, the elder said through the interpreter. You showed us that some of you still have honor. I didn't know what to say. I'd been living with the guilt and second-guessing for months, wondering if I'd betrayed my unit, wondering if I'd made the wrong choice. There's something else, the elder said. Rashid wanted me to give you this. He handed me a folded piece of paper. On it, in careful English letters, was written a single sentence. You gave me my life back. I will not waste it. I kept that note. I still have it today. Years after leaving the military, the lesson I learned that day in that compound wasn't about medical protocol or the Geneva Conventions. It was about something deeper, about the choices we make when no one is looking, when we could easily take the path of least resistance, when doing the right thing costs us something real. I could have let Rashid die. It would have been easier. It would have been safer for my reputation and my relationships with my unit. No one would have questioned it. Many would have praised it. But I would have known. I would have carried that choice with me for the rest of my life. Here's what I want you to understand. Integrity isn't about doing the right thing when it's easy or when everyone agrees with you. Integrity is about doing the right thing when it costs you something. When people you respect disagree with you. When the easy path is right there in front of you, and you choose the harder road anyway. After that deployment, I finished my service and left the military. I went to medical school and became an emergency room doctor. And every day, I treat patients without asking about their background, their choices, or whether they deserve my help, because that's not my job. My job is to preserve life. I've treated gang members who'd just been shot in a drive-by. I've treated drunk drivers who'd caused accidents that killed innocent people. I've treated patients who were verbally abusive, who threatened me, who made my job harder in every possible way. And I treat them all the same, because the moment I start deciding who deserves care and who doesn't, I've lost something essential. I've become someone I don't want to be. Now, I'm not saying there aren't hard choices in medicine or in combat. Resources are limited. Triage is real. Sometimes you do have to make decisions about who gets treated first. But those decisions should be based on medical need, not on moral judgment, not on whether we like someone or approve of their choices. If you've made it this far in the story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Have you ever stood up for your principles when it cost you something real? Drop a comment below and share your story. Sometimes we all need to hear that we're not alone in facing these difficult choices. The epilogue to my story came 5 years after that deployment. I was working in a hospital in Seattle when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was heavily accented but speaking careful English. "Dr. Chen, this is Rashid. You saved my life in Afghanistan." I almost dropped the phone. He told me that after his release from detention, he'd gone back to his village. He'd used the money he'd saved to open a small clinic, providing basic medical care to people in remote areas who had no access to doctors. "You taught me that healing is more powerful than killing," he said. "I wanted to thank you, and I wanted you to know that because of you, I've helped save many lives." We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about the challenges of running a clinic in rural Afghanistan, about the patients he'd treated, about the children who no longer had to die from preventable diseases. And then he said something that I'll never forget. "When you saved me, you didn't just save one life. You saved all the lives I've been able to save since then. That's the real power of choosing mercy." He was right. Every action we take ripples outward in ways we can't predict or control. When I made the choice to treat Rashid, I wasn't thinking about intelligence value, or hearts and minds campaigns, or any strategic considerations. I was just trying to live up to the oath I'd taken. But that one choice, that one moment of holding to my principles when it would have been easier not to, created a chain reaction that's still ongoing. If you found value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. I share real stories about difficult decisions, moral courage, and what it means to maintain your integrity in impossible situations. And click the like button if you believe that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard. The question I want to leave you with is this: who do you want to be when the choice is hard? What principles are you willing to stand by, even when it costs you something? Because here's the truth. Your character isn't defined by the easy choices. It's defined by what you do when doing the right thing means losing something you value, when it means being misunderstood, when it means standing alone. That day in Afghanistan, I learned that courage isn't just about running toward danger. Sometimes courage is about extending humanity to someone who doesn't deserve it by conventional standards. Sometimes courage is about being the person you want to be, regardless of what others think. I'm not a hero. I'm not special. I'm just someone who tried to live up to an oath I took seriously. And in doing so, I learned that the right choice and the easy choice are rarely the same thing. But the right choice is always the one you can live with. So I'll ask you one more time, what choice will you make when it matters? Leave a comment and let me know. Your story might inspire someone else to make the hard choice when their moment comes. And if you know someone in healthcare, military service, or any profession where they face ethical dilemmas regularly, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're not alone in struggling with these decisions. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent with your values, even when no one would blame you for compromising. Until next time, stay strong, stay principled, and never forget that every choice you make echoes further than you can see.